Hello, my little love. Did you have a good day today? I hope something made you smile. Now take a slow breath, relax your shoulders, and let your mind get soft and quiet. It's time for a gentle bedtime story. Once upon a time, there lived a kind man who loved to travel and see new places. He was curious about the world and loved to learn about different people and different ways of living. One day, he set out on a voyage across the wide blue ocean. Watching the waves roll gently and listening to the soft creaking of the ship as it moved through the water. The journey was long and peaceful. He spent his days watching seabirds glide on the wind, seeing dolphins leap and play in the waves, and feeling the warm sun on his face. The ocean sparkled like it was covered in tiny stars. And at night, the real stars came out, more than anyone could ever count, twinkling peacefully in the dark velvet sky. One morning, after many days at sea, the traveler felt very tired. He lay down to rest, rocked gently by the movement of the waves, and fell into the deepest, most peaceful sleep. When he finally woke, he felt something strange. He couldn't move very well. As his eyes adjusted to the bright morning light, he realized he was lying on a beach. And there were tiny ropes holding him gently in place, not hurting him, just keeping him still. Then he heard the softest, tiniest voices, like the sound of small bells ringing far away. He looked carefully and saw the most amazing thing. All around him were people, but these people were no bigger than his thumb. They were perfectly formed, with little clothes and little hats, and they were looking at him with curious but kind eyes. The traveler spoke to them gently, using his softest voice so he wouldn't startle them. The tiny people listened, and although they spoke a different language, they seemed to understand that he meant no harm. Slowly, carefully, they began to untie some of the ropes. They brought him tiny cups of water, which for them were buckets, but for him were just small sips. They brought him food on little carts, working together to help this giant stranger who had arrived on their shore. The traveler learned that he was in a land called Lilliput, where everything was tiny and perfect and wonderful. The little people led him to their city, walking slowly so he could follow. The buildings were like the most detailed dollhouses, with tiny windows and tiny doors and tiny chimneys that puffed out the smallest wisps of smoke. Gardens grew with flowers the size of his fingernail, in colors of pink and yellow and lavender. The tiny people were kind and generous. They made him a place to rest in a large old temple that was just big enough for him to fit inside if he bent down carefully. They brought him food and water, working together in teams, carrying things that were heavy for them but light as feathers to him. He watched them with wonder and gratitude, amazed at how hard they worked and how much they cared. In return, the traveler helped the tiny people however he could. When they needed to move something heavy, he would lift it gently with one finger. When they needed to cross water, he would lie down and make a bridge with his body, being very still so they could walk safely across. When there was a disagreement between two groups of tiny people, he would listen to both sides and help them find peaceful solutions that made everyone happy. The days passed softly and sweetly. The traveler learned some of the tiny language, and the tiny people learned some of his. They taught him about their customs and their celebrations. They showed him their tiny libraries with books the size of postage stamps, their tiny theaters where actors performed on stages small as matchboxes, their tiny farms, where they grew vegetables and grain with such care and patience. One day, the tiny people asked for his help with something important. There was another land across the water where tiny people also lived, and sometimes there were misunderstandings between the two lands. The traveler, being so much bigger and able to see so much more, helped them understand each other better. He waded through the shallow water that separated the lands, which to him came only to his knees, and he spoke kindly to the tiny people on both shores. He helped them see that they were not so different from each other, that they all wanted the same things: peace, happiness, safety for their children, enough food to eat, warm homes to live in. By speaking gently and listening carefully, he helped them remember that they could be friends instead of rivals. After many weeks in the land of tiny people, the traveler began to feel a soft longing for his own home. The tiny people understood. They had grown to love him, and he had grown to love them, but they knew that everyone needs to return home eventually. They prepared a special boat for him, working together for days, hundreds of tiny hands contributing to the project. On the morning he was to leave, all the tiny people came to say goodbye. They brought him tiny gifts, little tokens to remember them by. Some gave him drawings small as thumbnails. Others gave him tiny pressed flowers. The children gave him pebbles they had painted with careful designs. Each gift was precious and given with love. The traveler knelt down, and tears filled his eyes as he thanked them. He promised to remember them always, to tell stories about their kindness and their beautiful tiny land. The tiny people climbed onto his shoulders and arms one last time, giving him gentle pats with their tiny hands, like butterflies landing softly on his skin. He boarded the boat and waved goodbye, and all the tiny people waved back with handkerchiefs the size of postage stamps. As he sailed away, he could still see them on the shore, a crowd of tiny dots, all waving, all sending him off with love. The journey home was quiet and thoughtful. The traveler watched the ocean and the sky, thinking about all he had learned. He had learned that size doesn't matter when it comes to kindness. He had learned that being gentle and patient can solve problems that seemed impossible. He had learned that even the smallest acts of kindness, when done together, can create something beautiful and strong. He thought about how the tiny people had worked together, hundreds of them cooperating to achieve what one alone could never do. He thought about how they had welcomed him, a giant stranger, with curiosity instead of fear, with kindness instead of suspicion. He thought about the tiny children who had laughed and played, chasing butterflies that to them were as big as eagles, finding joy in the simplest things. When he finally reached his home, everything looked different to him. The houses seemed enormous. The people seemed like giants. But he carried inside him a new understanding, a new gentleness, a new appreciation for both the very small and the very large, and for the way all living things, no matter what size, share the same basic hopes and dreams. He spent the rest of his days telling stories about the tiny people, about their kindness and their courage, their hard work and their joy. Children would gather to listen, their eyes wide with wonder, imagining a land where everything was small and perfect and full of care. And the traveler would smile, remembering the feeling of tiny hands patting his cheek in friendship. remembering the sight of 1,000 tiny faces looking up at him with trust and love. The tiny people, in their distant land, remembered him too. They told stories about the gentle giant who came from the sea, who helped them and protected them and taught them about kindness. On clear nights, they would look up at the stars and wonder if somewhere, far away, their friend was looking at the same stars and thinking of them. And in this way, across distance and time, across differences in size and language, the bonds of friendship remained, warm and real and precious. Reminding everyone that kindness creates connections that can never be broken, and that love, no matter how small, is always big enough to fill the heart with light. You did well today, my little love. Now let your eyes grow heavy, and let the night wrap around you like a soft blanket. Sleep well, sweet dreams, and rest deeply.